Hi everyone, how's it going? Unfortunately today recording in class didn't really pan out, so we'll try it again here, and yeah, we'll get through it in a good time. So knowledge transfer is really relevant as far as any healthcare profession, and one of the main ways that this shows up is if we're working with a patient, we need to communicate some ideas to them. We need to do so in an evidence based way, but then on top of that, we want them to turn that into action. So it needs to be something that people can actively do with that information. It's a huge component and goal of knowledge transfer. Okay, so we're going to take a look at exactly what this is for three different cohorts: children, adolescents, and adults. And then we'll look at how the medium and the message can affect knowledge transfer. So specifically, knowledge transfer is the sharing or disseminating of information in an evidence-based manner. Now, the caveat to that again is the goal really is to make sure that whatever knowledge that we transfer on to others become put into action. Okay, so with children in particular and knowledge transfer, we need to understand where they're at neurodevelopmentally first and foremost. So where are their minds at in development? How can they understand the world around them? Because we need to be able to communicate at that level as well to make sure that they understand the message and what we want to try to get them to do. So we'll have a next lecture or two to discuss what children's sensory and perception of the world is and how that formulates their interactions with the world in a motor context. Today is a bit more of a learning context, and um, when they're integrating their cognition, their sensory, so perception of the world, it's challenging. It's always a little changing, as we've spoken about so far with motor changes. The same happens with our learning and cognitive abilities. So, what is the best means of helping children learn? Well, it really comes down to repetition over time and across situations. So, what does that mean? Well, the more frequently and in the more varied context that children learn something or perform something in particular, the more likely they are to learn it. And again, it's just because they're trying to integrate all the information in the world around them and soak everything up. The one kicker to that, or the caveat that occurs, is children have a challenging time taking something they've learned in one situation and doing it in another. So, for example, if you taught a child how to open a jar, it wouldn't necessarily just connect that same twisting and turning of a jar can be the same twisting and turning to open a toothpaste container. So again, more repetition through different situations allow those connections to be made. Similarly, doing, exploring, trying new things, this helps children integrate and figure out where those boundaries based off their perception and cognition of the world or understanding of the world lie. Now, play-based learning. I wanted to talk about that, and it's not because it's necessarily the best means of learning. So it's not necessarily the quickest or best. What it does do is help lay groundwork for children to start recognizing that they can connect different scenarios to be the same thing. Oftentimes, children see teaching and things that parents tell them to do as work, and play is play, so very separate things. But if you're to play a game like hopscotch and you're counting to 5 or 10, um, and you told them, you connected that dot, hey, you're learning how to count and you're playing the game, then they'll start to understand, they'll start bridging and making those connections. So it's up to adults as facilitators, either teachers or coaches or parents, to start drawing those connections for children, and so they can start understanding. And play is a really fun, engaging way for children to be able to do this and make that connection. Okay. Adolescence, I had to change that, and knowledge transfer. Okay, so teenagers, adolescents, and young adults. One of the best things that happen for adolescents' minds is this kind of hyper attenuating or turn up volume on reward systems. So just kind of skipping down to the second point. There's two here. The first one being the striatum. So we'll take a look just to get some reference. So it's this midbrain structure that's kind of like a relay system or a control system to help engage or reinforce things learned when our dopaminergic or dopamine based cells start trying to reward our brain. Okay, so what does this all mean, and what does this reward and learning system mean? Well, in the mind of a teenager, especially when it's heightened, we learn best from positive reinforcement. So we can learn from negative reinforcement as well as positive, and our systems are primed for positive reinforcement. So whenever there's things we need to learn, to memorize, to become engaged with, the more we can add positive reinforcement for adolescents, the better. The other thing that's going on neurodevelopmentally for adolescents is their prefrontal cortex is still developing. So the prefrontal cortex is really heavily involved in organization of thought, pre-planning, which also is heavily related to delayed gratification, and visual spatial skills, things of those natures. So when we kind of have this yet to be formulated control system, organization center of our brain, and this hyper reward system activated, it's easy to see why adolescents and young adults are so engaged and so drawn towards high reward positive reinforcement systems. One example would be video games, right? So we can keep that in mind and try to leverage that positively for adolescents, especially in a learning context and trying to transfer knowledge to them, right? That's the whole goal of all of this, knowledge transfer. So we can do things like have Kahoot, or I think a really great example is Duolingo. Okay, so positive reinforcement, 12-day learning streak. You got the right answer, 12 out of whatever, great job, really rewarding and fairly instantaneous. So you don't need to have that delayed gratification of having put in effort and learned something, in the sense that it happens immediately, this reward system. Okay. So a little way, and it's a little bit cheesy, and I like saying this, it's a bit of a life hack. If you want to teach yourself or train yourself to engage in something that isn't normally immediately rewarding, maybe it's a bit of a delayed gratification effort and practice sort of thing, what you can do is you can reward yourself in your mind. You don't have to do it out loud, although you can, with like a yes. So you say, like in your head, yes, give yourself a high five, a trophy, whatever it happens to be, for some sort of behavior that you did that you really, really liked and want to keep doing more of, okay? Or having learned something, or whatever the case is. And sure enough, studies show if you do that, you get a little release of dopamine, and that helps reinforce the learning, reinforce the behaviors that you're doing, okay? So that's positive reinforcement. And again, you don't need to memorize all of these pathways and stuff for this course, but if you recognize the striatum, say in a multiple choice question, that's good. You know the prefrontal cortex, and dopamine is part of the reward system, that's sufficient, okay? But there's one last thing that we can do to help adolescents be set up for success for when they get to adulthood, as far as their neurodevelopment goes and their capacity to be able to understand and handle knowledge transfer. And that's really this concept of having a growth mindset. So with a growth mindset, there's the understanding that qualities or characteristics such as intelligence is not a purely innate thing. Yes, true, genetics can set you up to have a certain range, but largely something like intelligence capacity or whatever metric you're trying to measure on is more so done through practice, persistence, not being set back in the face of challenges or barriers and criticisms, but using that as feedback and using quote unquote failures as learning moments, learning experiences to be able to grow and move forward. Okay. And that's, again, you can pause and go through each of these points to understand them a bit better, but that's the gist of a growth mindset. So the capacity that with effort, with persistence, you can master a skill, master a capacity, or improve something like cognition or your intelligence, and use feedback and the successes of others to do so. Okay. Okay. So that's adolescence. We'll move forward into adulthood. Again, slightly different. So in adulthood, our neurodevelopmental stage is relatively stable. Prefrontal cortex is set. We have good learning capacity. And this little bit of a shift happens. It happens over a few decades, but usually our prime for our working memory, so being able to learn and take on new information, as I said, which is at a peak in adolescence, kind of plateaus, slows down a little bit, but not terribly so. And working, yeah, so that working memory, the capacity to take on new information, new content. With older adulthood, what does increase as you get older is something called crystalline memory. So that's more finite, fixed facts. So you kind of accumulate this library of solidified knowledge, factual knowledge. Okay, it's not necessarily new information, but it's more and more facts that you can pull upon. And this kind of makes sense. As we go through life, we build more experiences, we have more knowledge that we can pull from, and developing this new system of trying to understand and learn becomes a little bit less important as we get older. Okay. Now, just for clarification, it's definitely well established that you can indeed teach an old dog new tricks. We learned about this concept last section of the class when we were talking about neuroplasticity. It just, for older adults versus adults, it takes a little bit longer because, again, that working memory capacity has decreased relative to adolescence and young adulthood. Okay, so this is applicable to all of us as post-secondary learners. What is the best means of learning? Well, it's taking an approach from adult learning theory and really leaning into the thought that adults are self-directed learners. So we have internal motivation to want to go out and seek and take responsibility for our own learning and our own knowledge gathering. So because of that, a lot of goal setting as far as learning or training programs is really important, but being actively involved and engaged in that goal setting is a bit of a cornerstone or a landmark for adult learning. Okay, great. So those are kind of our learning patterns, neurodevelopmental stages, and knowledge transfer for different developmental cohorts. Let's talk about the actual medium and the message now. So we have our medium and our message. What the heck are those? Well, anytime we're trying to communicate to people, whether it's just a one-on-one interpersonal conversation or a mass media kind of platform, there's always someone sending a message and someone receiving it, or someone's, right? Many people. So you need at least two parties in order for communication to occur. And the message is what is originally sent from the sender, who essentially, is trying to convey some sort of idea. The kicker is, and we probably know this from day-to-day life, is that the receiver, and this is a bit theoretical, but it holds up pretty true, I think, and most of us can reason this, that the message never really fully gets understood by the receiver. So we are always trying to tailor our message to best fit who we're speaking to. Okay, and one of the ways we can do that is through the medium. So the medium is the media or the method or the platform to which we're conveying the message to the receiver as senders. Okay, so um, yeah, when you get onto your assignment, and hopefully you've had a look at that already, and or maybe not, maybe you're seeing it after this. When the outline is talking about what's the best method or medium to convey your message to the target population audience, you really want to do some background research on that and make sure you're taking an evidence-based approach in how you're trying to convey that information. As an example, I wouldn't lecture to a group of 6-year-olds, right? What might we do instead? Engage in play-based learning, right? Versus, let's say, maybe trying to speak to a group of mid-20s somethings on how to improve their bone health, right? Bank your bone health before you're 30. Great. So to do that, maybe I'll do a series of TikTok videos or a podcast or something like that, where I know the target audience engages in consuming media that way. Okay. All right. So before that, I instantly, as soon as I start talking about communication and mediums and messages, I can't not think about Canadian heritage moments. So there used to be these little TV PSAs or public service announcements that would come on in between shows and talk about these classic moments of historic Canadian events. And here we have one. One example of one is Sir Walter Penfield, who was a brain surgeon, neurosurgeon. He kind of pioneered and discovered that different parts of the brain um, have different functions, and that if you open it up, you can do awake anesthetized surgeries and probe different parts of the brain, and that causes different memories to occur. So there's this woman having the surgery, and they're all poking around her brain, and all of a sudden, Dr. Penfield hits something, and she's like, "I smell toast. I smell burnt toast," and it's like this big to do for neurosurgery and discovery. So anyway, here we have one. We'll watch it. It's about the medium being the message. Okay, here's a great Canadian heritage moment.